The courtroom was a battlefield of silence and tension, the kind that crackled in the air before an inevitable storm. Cash Patel sat at the defendant's table, his posture rigid, his gaze unwavering. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he refused to let it show. To the outside world, this was the fall of a powerful man, a former FBI director brought low by allegations of deception and financial misconduct. But those who knew Patel understood that this was no ordinary trial. This wasn't just about money or legal formalities. It was about power, corruption, and the battle for truth against forces determined to bury it. The judge's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. The court finds the defendant, FBI Director Cash Patel, guilty of intentionally deceiving federal agencies and misusing funds from the Executive Transparency Program. The penalty, $500 million. The words sent shockwaves through the room. Gasps rippled outward as reporters scrambled to capture the reaction. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing Patel's expressionless face, his calm defiance in the face of what should have been an insurmountable defeat. But beneath the surface, something else was brewing. Patel had spent years navigating the murky waters of Washington politics, exposing corruption where others turned a blind eye. He had built his reputation not on privilege or political connections, but on relentless pursuit of justice. And now, as the gavel came down with a finality that should have sealed his fate, he remained composed. His eyes met those of his lawyers. Silent understanding passed between them. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. A legacy built on defiance. Cash Patel's journey to the pinnacle of law enforcement was anything but conventional. Born into modest circumstances, he never had the luxury of inherited influence or political favoritism. His rise was earned through sheer determination, an unyielding commitment to justice, and an ability to see beyond the surface of systemic corruption. Long before he donned the title of FBI director, Patel had already made a name for himself as a relentless investigator, one willing to take on cases that others deemed too dangerous or politically sensitive. Whether it was exposing embezzlement within intelligence agencies or uncovering clandestine operations hidden under layers of bureaucratic secrecy, Patel had always stood firm in his belief that no institution was above scrutiny. His tenure as FBI director only solidified his reputation as a maverick. While many in positions of power sought to maintain the status quo, Patel saw his role as a duty to challenge it. He pursued whistleblowers not as threats, but as crucial allies in the fight against institutional rot. He pushed for transparency, often clashing with officials who preferred to operate in shadows. His investigations led to the downfall of powerful figures, some of whom had long believed themselves untouchable. With each case, Patel reinforced his belief that the law was not a tool for the elite, but a shield for the people. Yet such convictions did not come without consequences. In a system where loyalty often outweighed integrity, Patel's refusal to compromise made him enemies in high places. He had exposed too much, challenged too many, and disrupted too many carefully constructed narratives. The $500 million fine was not just a legal judgment, it was a warning. It was meant to send a message to anyone who dared to question the system's authority, but they underestimated him. They assumed that wealth and power could break him, that the threat of financial ruin would force him into submission. What they failed to understand was that Patel was not driven by personal gain or political ambition. He was driven by principle. And principles, once rooted deeply, are not so easily shaken. The weight of expectation. As the courtroom absorbed the gravity of the ruling, murmurs of disbelief rippled through the audience. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against paper like frantic whispers trying to capture the magnitude of the moment. Camera crews adjusted their lenses, zooming in on Patel's unmoving figure, searching for any sign of emotion, any crack in the armor of stoicism he presented. Yet there was none. No flinch, no hesitation, no visible reaction to the staggering sum that had just been levied against him. To the casual observer, he might have seemed resigned to his fate, but those who truly understood Patel knew better. This was not defeat. This was calculation. The media wasted no time in seizing upon the verdict, painting Patel as a fallen giant. Headlines across the nation declared the collapse of a once revered leader, branding him a fraud, a manipulator who had abused his position for personal gain. Conservative outlets framed it as the inevitable downfall of a liberal bureaucrat who had overstepped his bounds, while progressive voices debated whether Patel had truly gone too far in his crusade against corruption. Social media exploded with speculation, conspiracy theories, and calls for further investigation into every aspect of his past. For many, the verdict was confirmation that even the most powerful were not immune to the reach of the law. Yet beneath the noise, another current ran strong. Whispers spread among those who had worked alongside Patel, among those who had seen firsthand the battles he had fought against entrenched interests. They knew the truth was far more complex than the headlines suggested. They had witnessed the quiet defiance in Patel's eyes when he faced off against corrupt officials, the way he had risked everything to expose wrongdoing. And now, as the world watched him sit motionless in the face of what should have been his undoing, they sensed something else, an unspoken promise that this was not the end. Patel had not come here to surrender. He had come to reveal something far greater. Cash Patel exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle around him like an invisible shroud. The courtroom buzzed with the energy of journalists scrambling to capture the fallout. But Patel remained still, his mind working through the implications of what had just transpired. This was not unexpected. He had known from the start that the system was rigged against him, that the prosecution's case was built on half-truths and conveniently missing evidence. What surprised him was not the sentence itself, but the confidence with which it had been delivered, as if they believed he would simply disappear into obscurity, crushed beneath the weight of the fine and the public disgrace. He glanced at Sarah Langston, his lead attorney, and gave the smallest nod. She understood. The plan was already in motion. Patel had spent years navigating the corridors of power, learning how the game was played, and more importantly, how to turn it against those who thought they controlled it. He had anticipated this outcome, prepared for it, and now the moment had arrived. The system had tried to destroy him, but they had underestimated his resolve and his allies. Behind the polished veneer of the courtroom, unseen forces had been at work. Patel had spent months gathering information, piecing together a puzzle that extended far beyond his own indictment. He had followed the money, traced the patterns of influence, and uncovered a web of deceit that reached into the highest levels of government. And now the time had come to unveil it. Not with dramatic speeches or emotional outbursts, but with cold, undeniable facts that would shake the foundations of the very institution that had condemned him. As the judge dismissed the proceedings, Patel remained seated, watching as the courtroom emptied. The reporters filed out, eager to publish their stories before the next breaking development. Prosecutors exchanged wary glances, unaware that they had just set something irreversible into motion. Patel rose slowly, adjusting his tie with deliberate precision. The battle was only beginning. The courtroom was still reeling from the weight of the sentence, when Patel's whisper cut through the silence like a knife. "Show them what they don't want to see." The words were barely audible, yet they carried the force of a seismic shift. Sarah Langston didn't hesitate. Her hand moved with practiced precision, reaching into her briefcase and pulling out the manila envelope that had been hidden away until this exact moment. It was thicker than expected, its edges worn from handling, but its contents were pristine, proof that would dismantle the entire case against Patel piece by piece. She stepped forward, placing the envelope on the judge's bench with quiet authority. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "Before any penalty is enforced, we request the court's permission to present new evidence." The room fell silent. Even the reporters, who had been frantically typing away moments ago, paused mid-sentence, their fingers hovering over keyboards. The prosecution exchanged uneasy glances. Michael Stone, the federal prosecutor who had confidently delivered the damning verdict mere minutes ago, stiffened in his seat, his smirk fading. "This evidence was deliberately withheld from us," Sarah continued, her gaze unwavering. "We received it 3 days ago from a whistleblower within the Justice Department." The words landed like a bombshell. Murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom, growing louder by the second. A whistleblower? Inside the Justice Department? The implications were staggering. If true, this could mean that Patel's case had been orchestrated from the inside, a manufactured scandal designed to bring him down. Judge Marshall's eyes narrowed as he studied the envelope resting on his desk. His fingers twitched slightly before he reached out, gripping the edge of the paper with measured caution. He opened it slowly, methodically, as if bracing for whatever lay inside. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, his composure shifted. The confident authority that had defined his presence since the trial's beginning wavered ever so slightly. He flipped through page after page, his lips tightening with each revelation. Then silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The judge's hands stilled, his breath slowed. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for his response. Then in a voice that barely concealed the tremor beneath, Judge Marshall spoke. "This changes everything." The documents laid bare a reality that shattered the foundation of the prosecution's case. Each page was a meticulously compiled dossier of financial records, internal memos, and communications that pointed to a third-party contractor as the source of the discrepancies. The contractor, a shadowy entity tied to multiple government contracts, had manipulated data and funneled funds through convoluted channels, creating the illusion of financial misconduct on Patel's part. The evidence was irrefutable. Detailed spreadsheets showing the flow of funds, timestamps correlating to fraudulent transactions, and signed acknowledgments from senior officials confirming the contractor's involvement. It was a masterclass in deception, executed with surgical precision, leaving Patel's actions completely exonerated. As the judge continued reading, the courtroom transformed into a tableau of stunned disbelief. Michael Stone, who had confidently proclaimed Patel's guilt mere minutes earlier, now sat frozen, his jaw slack and eyes darting nervously between the judge and the defense table. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that the case he had so meticulously constructed was unraveling before his eyes. Across the aisle, Patel remained motionless, his calm demeanor belying the storm of vindication brewing within. His eyes flicked toward Sarah Langston, a subtle nod acknowledging her flawless execution of the plan. The reporters, initially preoccupied with crafting sensational headlines, now scrambled to keep up with the unfolding drama. Their pens scratched furiously against notepads, recording every detail of the shifting narrative. Camera operators adjusted their focus, capturing the palpable tension in the room, the stunned faces of the prosecution, the cautious optimism of Patel's legal team, and the growing sense of unease among the spectators. The murmurs of speculation grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the crowd as whispers of conspiracy and corruption filled the air. For the audience, the revelation was nothing short of earth-shattering. Many had come expecting to witness the downfall of a disgraced official, only to find themselves staring at the exposure of a systemic cover-up. The documents painted a picture of collusion between high-ranking officials and the contractor, implicating individuals far beyond Patel's orbit. The implications were staggering. If this level of deceit could be orchestrated against someone of Patel's stature, what other injustices were lurking beneath the surface of the justice system? Judge Marshall finally closed the envelope, his face pale and drawn. He leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken by the weight of what he had just read. The courtroom waited, holding its breath as the judge's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Patel before settling on the prosecution. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the gravitas of a man confronting the enormity of his own complicity in a flawed system. "This changes everything," he repeated, the words echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The judge's decision to vacate the $500 million penalty against Cash Patel shocked the courtroom and exposed deep flaws in the justice system. What began as a straightforward prosecution unraveled, revealing ignored evidence and raising questions about corruption at the highest levels. Reporters scrambled, the public reacted with outrage, and speculation soared. If a former FBI director could be framed, who else was at risk? Patel remained composed, vindicated but focused on reform, not revenge. He called for stronger protections for whistleblowers and judicial accountability, turning his ordeal into a movement. Social media exploded with support and protest, while Congress faced pressure to investigate those responsible. Patel's story transcended headlines, becoming a nationwide reckoning. Traveling across the country, Patel listened to citizens, engaging in grassroots dialogue to rebuild trust. His proposals focused on transparency, fairness, and restoring justice from the ground up. More than just clearing his name, he sparked a call to action. Patel's journey is a powerful reminder. Truth needs no spectacle, only courage. His fight proves that individuals can challenge broken systems, and real change begins when ordinary people refuse to stay silent.